So as we come, okay, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Bonjour à tous. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today and to moderate this session. I hope that the spirit of Teranga in Senegal will be with us and that all of you will feel a part of this conversation. My name is Wevin Muganda. I am a member of the Community-Oriented Data and Engagement Council, which was initiated by Data for Change, our host for this event, but I'm also the founder of Active Citizens, which is a civic that empowers and amplifies citizen engagement through data-driven insights and advocacy. And I'm joined today in this conversation with Awok, so please join me on stage. Marcy, please join me on stage. Eric and Kathy, and we'll get time to listen to everyone who's here today. My work focuses on bridging the gap between grassroots action and global advocacy, translating complex strategic policies, research, and goals into actionable practices for civil society organizations, UN agencies, national governments, and development partners. I've led data-driven advocacy campaigns, including Sautia Haki and Mutual Aid Kenya, to amplify the voices of marginalized groups within the justice system and enhance their participation in decision-making processes. In 2017, while working at Haki Africa, our Sautia Haki campaign focused on visualizing the experiences of victims of enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings. And we did this in collaboration with Data for Change. We collected and analyzed sensitive data, transforming personal narratives into compelling visual representations that highlighted systemic injustices. This approach not only amplified the voices of marginalized communities, but also resulted in a public inquiry by the Office of the DPP. These experiences directly inform my work today at Active Citizens, where we aim to prioritize ethical and trust-based approaches to data collection and ensure that the citizens that we engage are not only empowered, but are informed, and ensuring that we safeguard their privacy while honoring their lived experiences. Our panel today is titled From Voices to Variables to Voices, Community-led Data as a Catalyst for Democracy and Participation. It's all about the power of data, not just data as numbers, but the data that's collected by the very communities who are most affected. It's about taking personal stories, turning them into powerful data sets, and then shaping these data sets into narratives that then change systemic policies. Data, when used well, is a transformative tool. And at the core of our discussion today, we will talk more about the fact that data is and should always be about the people. That's why this session is important today. I'd like to share more about the powerful impact of community-led data, but I'd much rather you hear from our panelists today. We have an amazing lineup. We have Awok Kasahun from Ethiopia, who is leading here the Blind Spot Project, using sonified data, turning data into sound to bridge the digital divide for visually impaired individuals. Then we have Mercy Mutemi, a powerhouse lawyer from Kenya, who will speak more about the fight to hold big tech accountable for human rights abuses in Africa. We have Eric, whose campaign in Uganda and Project Equal Victims is tackling intimate partner violence in the GBQ community through community-driven data. And finally, we have Catherine, who leads the APRO Tools project and will discuss digital rights defenders, how digital rights defenders are using accessible data to make waves at the UN. As you will hear today, we have different experiences, but at the core of it, we're centering the voices of marginalized communities. We'll be talking about LGBTQ communities. We'll be talking about communities affected by big tech. We'll be talking about the strategies that the individuals in the panel today that they're using and their approaches to be able to turn this data into stories. So without further ado, we'll go into our discussion, and I'll pass on the mic to Eric, who will, we'll pass it on to Catherine, who will introduce herself and the work that she does. Over to you.
Good morning. Well, I thought you were all sleepy, but I'm very glad to be here. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Catherine Anite. I'm the program director at Small Media Foundation, which is a London-based organization that advances digital rights across the world. So I run the APRO project, and under the APRO project, we advance freedom of expression, access to information, and digital rights in general in over 30 countries across sub-Saharan Africa, the MENA region, and Central Asia, specifically Tajikistan and Turkey. And our approach in our work is supporting local advocates in all the over 30 countries. We equip them and capacitate them to be able to engage in international advocacy at the UN, specifically using the UPR, the Universal Periodic Review Mechanism, to create change in digital rights. And ever since this project started in 2018, we can for sure say that we have received hundreds of recommendations, specifically advancing digital rights through our advocacy. So at APRO, data is at the core of our work. So when this project started in 2018, with the alliance, with our D4C alliance, we created the APRO tools. APRO tools is a tool that helps our local partners, human rights defenders and advocates across all the 30 and so countries, and those who don't actually belong to the APRO community, to engage in research. So it helps them to tailor-make recommendations that they would want to see at the Universal Periodic Review, and also helps them make, countries that would make those recommendations. So for example, we now know which countries are across the world would be able to make digital rights recommendations. So I'll mention like Estonia. We are always sure that Estonia is going to pick up recommendations on digital rights, and sometimes, or most times, they copy our recommendations verbatim, and we hear those recommendations come through during the Universal Periodic Review process. So maybe I'll stop here, and later on we'll have a discussion on how our advocacy has created change across the world in terms of digital rights. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and speak about the projects that we are doing. So thank you very much, Data for Change, and thank you very much, CPSA, for facilitating the chance to speak here. My name is Awek Adanyo. I am from Ethiopia. So we do some ICT accessibility projects for persons with disabilities in Ethiopia. Currently, I am working as the strategy and programs manager at Hope International Development Agency, and at the same time, I had also actively volunteered with Together, with which today I'm here. So at Together, we empower persons with disabilities through information communication technology accessibility, scholarship services, rehabilitation and livelihood empowerment of persons with visual impairment. Since 2012, 13, like for the past 10 years, we have been able to empower around 10,000 persons with visual impairment and their family members. Our efforts mostly focus on the provision of visually impaired individuals with education in computer technology and improve access to digital tools. So our advocacy has led to Ethiopian public universities to adapt some of the ICT, inclusive ICT curriculums from together so that persons with visual impairments can enhance their digital inclusion to be able to use the digital tools and adapt, align with the rapidly growing technological advancement. So in our work, data plays a key role in empowering persons with disabilities and their family members. However, there's a problem that's a big challenge for us, that reliable data is not adequately there for programming of persons with visual empowerment of persons with visual impairment. There are also challenges like data manipulation and concealment of information by the family members of persons with visual impairment, and at the same time by themselves. There is also willingness. That's a challenge. So to address this, with the financial and technical backup from Data for Change, we have been able to collect some critical data in 2019, and we have been able to produce an impactful and powerful data-driven advocacy product, which we call Hear the Blind Spot. That's a data sonification mechanism, which I will be explaining more later. So our sustained advocacy efforts are now changing the attitudes of our stakeholders, including persons with visual impairment, and fostering a greater focus on inclusion in ICT and inclusive development practices. So internationally, our Hear the Blind Spot project, which is based on data sonification, has received recognition and award from the 2021 Nelson Mandela Graça Machel Innovation Award in the activism sector. So thank you very much.
Hello everyone, I promise I look like that sometimes, not right now. My work revolves around universal access to the internet, and that takes different forms. Part of it is pushing for access in its primal form, just access to the infrastructure and also accessibility in terms of cost. But that's just one part of universal access. To truly be able to say that we have achieved universal access is to examine each silo of community and make sure that the kind of access we have is equitable. What this means is that the kind of products we have access to are fair products all across the board. We've reached a stage really in our access journey where if you access social media products from the EU, from the US, you're accessing a superior product as opposed to someone who's experiencing the same product in Ethiopia, Kenya, or even in Zambia. So my work has led me to challenging a lot of big tech accountability in terms of their products, how their algorithms are being optimized to make sure that there's fairness and fair access for Africans. But at the same time, the back end that goes towards this process, how are they treating the African youth on whose backs and minds their platforms are built? So right now it looks like a lot of digital labor litigation as well to push for fair working conditions, because that has a direct impact on what the products are going to look like. If you mistreat your labor force, then you don't end up with good algorithms, because that's the same labor you trust to come up with fair algorithms. Now we find ourselves in this situation where if you're in Africa, the kind of products you have are really of an inferior quality, and what's worse, these products are putting people who are already at risk into more risk. For example, in Ethiopia, the role that Facebook played in catalyzing the war there as well, and conflict and attacks, direct attacks against Tigrayans is very well documented, and that's one of the cases we have taken to court. But then in the example of Kenya, just how the algorithm amplifies hate towards people of the queer community, and you get rewarded for this hate with more virality, is something we've been looking to litigate as well in Kenya. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Hi everyone. My name is Eric Ndaula. I am from Uganda. Greetings from the Pearl of Africa. I lead an organization called Lifeline Youth Empowerment Center. We are committed to empowering LGBTQ youth through health, rights and advocacy and data-driven initiatives. At Lifeline Youth Empowerment Center, we focus on enhancing the health rights of marginalized LGBTQ communities in Uganda. We provide safe spaces for youth to run advocacy programs that amplify their voices. We also collaborate with other organizations to offer comprehensive services, including health, legal aid, capacity building initiatives. Our work addresses issues also like mental health, reproductive rights, and protection from violence, aiming to bridge the gaps for our community. We use data specifically to address these systematic challenges facing the marginalized LGBTQ community in Uganda. And one of our projects that we shall be talking about much later is called the Eco Victims. We collect data and analyze it on intimate partner violence within the gay, bisexual, and queer young men community in Uganda. The project focuses on the community-driven data collection, and it spotlights and the often ignored issue, using findings to advocate for better protective measures and support. We also have our data basics training, where we equip the LGBTQ community members with skills to ethically collect, interpret, and present data, fostering a culture of trust, dignity, and handling sensitive information. Additionally, as part of our Data for Change initiatives, we've had the opportunity to work with experts globally and build the data-driven campaigns to shift the public perception and influence policies, specifically for the LGBT community back in Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, everyone else. So we've heard about increasing access to justice using data. We've also heard about giving a chance to visually impaired individuals to have the same experience as we do through data. But before we continue, so first of all, I'll just ask those at the back to come forward. But I've always been curious, and maybe we can find an answer once and for all. Who comes first, the chicken or the egg? Any takers? Chicken or the egg? You just had lunch, so yes? The egg, yes? Anyone else? We all agree the egg came first? The chicken? Okay, I was thinking about it in the analogy of data and digital technologies. Which one comes first, if at all? I don't think there's any that comes first, but to make my point is, we're talking about internet freedom, and everything that goes into the internet is data, right? Digital data. But our panel today will also show us that data exists without digital technologies, but a lot of our data is going into the internet. So what does this mean? We will find the nexus between the work that we do, because our panelists today will be heavy on the data, but we'll also talk about how it interweaves in the internet. So I'll just start with the first question. How do you balance the need for detailed insights with the responsibility to protect vulnerable communities from harm? And what ethical considerations guide your decisions on if, when, and how to collect and use this data? I'll ask Eric to jump on this. Can we get another mic, please? So how do you balance the need for detailed insights vis-a-vis how do you balance the need for detailed insights vis-a-vis the safety and dignity of the communities? You work with the queer individuals in Uganda. We know the legal repercussions of identifying as queer in Uganda, but if you don't collect the data, it means that queer individuals cannot be counted, right? So how do you balance this phenomenon?
Thank you so much, Wivin, for the question. First of all, I'd like to say that there is no importance when we shrink ourselves. In most cases, we have the urge to shrink ourselves because the society has told us that we do not belong. It has told us that we do not have a space at the table. But who creates that space at the table? We do create that space at the table. And you rightfully so said that if we do not create data, they're not going to find us important. There is a time when our community was called, they didn't believe that we exist. They didn't believe that the LGBTQ community actually exists in Africa. And then there's a time when they accepted, yes, they are there, but they're very hard to reach. And then at a certain point, they are now calling us the key population community. So at the end of the day, what defines these terms is the data that is collected at the end of the day. So we continue to collect data as our communities, tell the stories in the way that we want to tell them. Because again, the insights are very important. There are very many nuances, there are very many challenges that the community faces, but sometimes we are cocooned into just the sexual bit. In most cases, someone thinks about the LGBTQ person or an LGBTQ person, and they just immediately undress them and put them to bed. But there is a person behind the acronym. There is a person behind that letter. So that's why we continuously say that collecting data is important, but also protection of the people is important. Shrinking ourselves does not help us. Importantly, if we are thinking about change, change begins with us. And it begins with telling our stories the way that we want to tell the stories to be told. If we give that power to someone else to tell the stories, they are going to bastardize the conversation. And that's not why you're here.
Thank you, Eric. And just moving to Mercy a bit, because in the morning we talked about the situation for content moderators, and you also expressly shared how difficult it is to get testimonies, to build evidence, and all of this is data. So I know you're currently trying to balance this. So how are you doing it? How are you balancing the need for you to get your evidence, present in court vis-a-vis the moderators, their NDAs, their security? Yeah. Maybe you can.
So let me start by saying that cases are evidence and evidence is data. So if you don't have data, you cannot access justice. That's just the long and short of it. One way or another, the court will not give you justice if you cannot prove the things you're saying. And more nuanced layer to this is that the court cannot give justice to victims who are not before it. So you have to figure out how to present very, very vulnerable victims to court without subjecting them to violence. In the case of the content moderators, the practical example is we knew that they were going through horrible working conditions from 2022. That was the first time we were in touch with Daniel Motaung, and he'd gotten out and he put us in touch with so many of them inside. And we were in constant communication, but they were very clear that you can represent me, but don't name me. So we were in this situation where we were supposed to protect workers who cannot come forward because of the NDA, because of the kinds of threats that they were receiving while doing the work. And this situation still persists for those who are doing content moderation for TikTok.
under Teleperformance. It's the same thing. They reach out to us on a weekly basis, but it's like, I want you to go to court, but I can't come forward yet. So it's difficult really to pursue justice for them, and how one of the ways we'd tried to do it is to go through one person who has no problem being publicly visible and doing it as a representative action, to which the comments from the court, you know, not officially, but really every time we would tell him he's representing many people, he would constantly ask us, but where are they, right? Where are these people? The other example I can think of is in Abraham's case. This case we filed, really it's representative of any African who has suffered harm from content that was being moderated in Nairobi. And the purview is really wide because they are moderating content for Eastern and Southern Africa. So there are people who were affected by those decisions that are as far south as South Africa. There are people who are in Ethiopia, Somalia. It's very wide. It's representative, it's a class action suit in itself, but where are these people? How do we access them? How do we tell them if the court ends up agreeing with us that Meta failed an entire continent with its content moderation and algorithm practices that were very discriminatory? How do we tell them, you need to tap into this case to access this fund that the court has created where you are entitled to monetary rewards? So it's difficult, and the only legal tool that's available is to apply for anonymity before the courts. But even then, you have to make full disclosure to the court and to the opposing side, and trust that the opposing side will keep to their duty of confidentiality in not revealing the identity. How you trust your enemy to protect your most vulnerable clients is really such a difficult situation.
Yeah.
But the answer is not that there's no legal way of protecting them. The answer is it's a complicated way to do it, but we are trying to navigate it as well.
Thank you for that. And both you and Eric raised important points around anonymity when it comes to the use of the data. And I think also one thing that we need to be cognizant of is when we're moving together with marginalized groups, of course the process is going to be slower. Of course we have to take into account their safety and dignity, but it's worth it. Kathy, I'm wondering if you have examples of tools and resources that can support organizations or the work that Eric and Mercy are doing in terms of collecting the data of marginalized groups. What tools can they use? What frameworks? Have you seen any examples that you could share with us that have worked?
So I'll start by saying that there's no life worth a story. So it's very important that when you're collecting this data, you have a contextual understanding of the country, of the community, and of the people that you seek the data from. So before I go into the tools, I'll just give an example of how the APRO project operates. So we work with local activists, human rights defenders, to collect this data, and sometimes it's just impossible because of the volatile situation. I'll give an example of Djibouti. So we normally submit these UN reports before the UPR sessions, but it was very difficult to get a partner to work with in Djibouti. We got one partner, and then at the end of the day, they said they were busy. They recommended a second partner, who also said they were busy, and they recommended a third partner. And the third partner was telling us, okay, so we're going to draft this report. We had a contract. At the end of the day, they didn't deliver. But you know, at that time, we didn't have a proper understanding of the context. And when I had a further review of the laws in Djibouti, actually, it's when the media organizations work with foreign entities or foreign organizations, there are repercussions. And that is why I think, you know, it was difficult to work in Djibouti. But I think the security measures that we put in place you know, there are organizations that have security measures for HRDs. So for example, Defenders is a good organization to partner with. APRO does not provide, you know, resources, extensive resources for security, but we do have other partners that we work with, like Defenders. If they're journalists, there are other resources. I see Media Defense in the room, so we could put you in touch with Media Defense as well that can support you. There's the high-level panel of legal experts on media freedom, which I sit on. They also provide security support to journalists across the world. So if any of you know journalists in distress, would be happy to provide that support. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you for that. And of course, collaboration is always the way to go. Awoke, I'm curious about your work with visually impaired individuals and the campaign that you worked with. Looking at the context in many of our countries where there's a lot of disempowerment of persons with disability, how did you create this trust so that they can be confident enough to work with you and agree that they will be part of the data collection and the entire exercise? And how do you ensure that the entire process doesn't end up either re-traumatizing them or causing more harm?
Thank you, Wevin. The first thing that I learned when working with persons with disabilities, especially the visually impaired ones, was like there is a big challenge of denial of their existence while there is like demographic and health surveys and some other data collection by the family members even. So the first strategy that we devised to cope from this challenge was like, there must be, if we need some reliable and accurate data from visually impaired individuals, we need an integrity first from our end. Understanding and believing in their capacity, believing in their potentials and capabilities is the first thing before we go to collect the data and interpret that and change to some variables to create your advocacy product or data-driven advocacy campaign initiatives. So, like the traditional mechanisms of data collection that you ensure confidentiality, privacy, and something like that, it's a little bit more different, and it needs curiosity when you are collecting information, when you are collecting data from visually impaired individuals. So when we say like the safety and dignity of persons with visual impairment must be protected before you go to collect the information, means you need to break down the issues that must be included before you start the data collection process. So when you say informed consent, traditionally we say informed consent is important, and you go to the person who is responding to you, and then you get either oral or unwritten contact from that person. But when you work with visually impaired individuals, you need to make sure that there is trust between yourself and the one who is giving you the data. So choosing, it must start from like choosing a safe space for you to build trust between the person with visual impairment and the data collector. And then you need to be clear in your communication that the information that you're taking from the person, that person is used for something which is bigger, and then you have to make sure that that information will be used for the sake of advocating on behalf of them and strategizing for programming. You need to show them the big picture of the end product of your data collection. So you need to firmly explain that they had the right to withdraw from the data collection process, but at the same time, if you let them know the biggest picture of your data collection process, and you give them the chance to voluntarily participate, and if they understand you, there is an integrity within you, then they will give you some important information, and that's the way how we create the Hear the Blind Spot sonified data mechanism of powerful advocacy campaign project. Thank you.
Thank you, Awoke, for that. And I really like what you said. You need to let the people know what data you will collect, how you will use it, and so on. I want to jump to the audience really quickly for any questions or commentary. But before that, I'll just ask each of the panelists to give me one strategy or one approach or one insight around preventing re-traumatization of the communities that we work with or that we're trying to serve. I want to emphasize on this because a lot of us here are working in the digital space. A lot of what we use to build our digital campaigns and tools and resources comes from the data that we collect in other communities that we may not necessarily be living in or working in. So I think this is important. So I'll ask maybe just one insight, and also this is the time if you have a question or comment to put your hand up. Mercy?
Okay. I'm the worst person to ask that question because the very definition of my work is to re-traumatize people, because if I am not able to capture their experience in detail, then we don't get to pass the evidentiary threshold that is necessary for us. So I don't have a strategy for avoiding re-traumatization because it's part of the process. I do have a strategy around care. These people come to us already having gone through such horrible experiences in life, and trust us to, capture this very accurately, which is a re-traumatizing process in itself, but we do have a responsibility for care. And my advice would be for any organization that's looking into mitigation to have a budgetary allocation for care, whether that looks like therapy services alongside evidence collection, because it will happen, and that is necessary. For you to access justice, you have to go through the painful process, but we can still provide care.
Thank you for that. Eric?
Thank you. So, I think the most important thing is imagine a person who has gone through trouble of intimate partner violence, and you're seated in your office and you send them a Google form to feel about their experience. That is being so inconsiderate. I think the most important thing is to always not just look at the numbers, to think that behind those numbers there's an individual and there's a person's story that you will love to listen empathetically and understand from their point of view. From our side, when we are collecting the eco-victims data, we realize that we are going to work with people who have gone through really traumatic experiences, and to give them Google Docs, to give them all these questionnaires that are going to re-traumatize them, we need to first of all think about them in a way that can we already select pre-selected elements, things that are not going to traumatize them, like emojis, images that are going to represent the situations that they are trying to tell us, but in another way we can be able to decode that information from our side. And that kind of methodology helped us that a lot of people were interested to share their stories, but were also not traumatized in a way that they are going to revisit what they were going through exactly, and in a very formal way, coming like a robot, giving them all these forms to fill in. So, but also to what Mercy mentioned, you need to always, on standby, have at least a counselor or a professional psychiatrist or a professional psychologist who can be able to help the person if they're triggered with the questions that you're asking them. People are going through a hard time, and whereas we need their stories, at the end of that story, it doesn't have to be at the cost of their mental health. you need to be able to support them if they are going through such and they need that support.
Thank you, Eric. Kathy?
I think it's very important to identify the triggers and work around those. One, by being extremely transparent with your methodology, create a relaxing environment for this person. So if the person is going through trauma caused by a military or the police, you cannot conduct your data collection maybe near a barracks or a police station. And then the way in which you extract the information, is it combative, is it empathetic? So we need to, work around those triggers and then look at these people as, firstly as humans and be empathetic to them, be in their shoes, and then we will get the information in the right way.
Thank you for that. Awoke?
So thank you. As I mentioned when I begin, so respecting the pace that your respondent is going to give you some insights from his or her lived experiences about the experiences, the challenges, the social and economic and political exclusions that they might be suffering from, requires respecting the pace of your respondent. So when you respect the pace of your respondent, they might be even pointing out which place is safer for them, which time will be safer for them. So you will not be traumatizing them because of they are giving you some information or data relevant to your initiative. So it is important to keep and respect their pace.
Thank you. We've had empathy, we've had care, we've had risk mitigation, so being more proactive, as Kathy said, understanding what triggers, and then coming up with a response in advance, and also keeping and respecting where these communities live. And I think it goes to, go to where the people are and where they prefer. I just wanted to check if there's any question or commentary. I think the first part of the panel was about the science, the data, how do we collect it, how do we use it. But in the second part of this panel, we want to, in the words of the MP yesterday, is to merge science with politics and policy. So what is this use of data, and what does it really mean when it comes to policy change and systemic change? So we'll now talk about how do we turn these voices into actionable data. And I think I will just start with looking at the challenges and the successes. I know you've had some challenges, you've had some successes. How has it been when you're trying to turn these community stories into data that drives real world change? And connected to that, in addition to how you do it, how do you decide which approaches, or rather which strategy to take? How do you decide if you want to go to court or present your universal periodic review at the UN, or you want to lead a mass action, or you want to use maybe art to convey this message? We'll start with Eric.
Thank you. So to decide on that, you can never do that alone, honestly. It's community data, and you cannot sit and decide on what to use community data if the community itself is not ready for the repercussion that might come from a litigation. Coming from a community that is very volatile, to decide to go to court on any litigation matter, I think the community needs to have garnered consensus to agree that we have collected this data and we feel like this data could really help us in this and this space. But also continuously collecting this data is important, because we have seen in our country where we have sat on tables with different government officials that are willing to listen, but they're not willing to listen from a point of hearsay. This is what we know. This is what we hear people saying. They are willing to sit down on the table to listen based on the evidence, based on the data that we collected from the community. So whereas there is action on a larger scale on going to the UN or going to these councils or going to court for litigation purposes, there are other opportunities behind closed doors, especially for communities as volatile as my community in Uganda, where they are willing to have a seat at the table to listen to our issues with evidence, and they're willing to make even the slightest of change that can make an LGBTQ person's life better, step by step.
Thank you for that. Awoke, I'm wondering, what were the challenges? I know a lot of times when you talk about disability inclusion, especially, suddenly we don't have the resources to do it, or we don't know how to do it. So what are the challenges and successes that you've experienced? And you had a very interesting approach to your advocacy. As you will see in the screen or up there, where everyone got to have the same experience, which doesn't happen as often. So for both visually impaired individuals and those who are not visually impaired, being able to experience this sonified data. Why did you decide to take this approach? What are the challenges and successes?
Yeah. After collecting the data that we want to make it a powerful data-driven advocacy program for the rights of persons with visual impairment, the biggest challenge comes, how can we make this in an accessible format so that we can address persons with visual impairment and at the same time the sighted group of full challenge to take part in the education and employment and skills training arena. So this endeavor already led us to look for and strategize how might we bring an accessible format that makes persons with visual impairment empowered, feel empowered, and then our initiative more stronger and data-driven advocacy program. So once we do this, we gather together and join a design sprint that's organized by Data for Change. In the design sprint, we teamed up from different countries and the idea becomes, during our prototyping session, we brought the issue of like, here the blind spot might be like, we can use a data sonification mechanism to make our initiative accessible and more addressing a number of individuals, including the sighted group of people. So the data sonification means, shortly, it is a process of transforming the data you have into sound through music. So this is the data sonification process that we do through music, and the elements of the information that we collect, including the substantiated information that we have gathered from some open sources were like used, and they are like assigned with volumes and pitch and the continuity of the sound, so that the data sonification process has transformed the data to a valuable format of like an advocacy sound system. So that was the very wonderful program that we have designed, and it is like a new way of experiencing and conceptualizing the data through music and sound. So here the Blind Spot program comes out of a very big challenge of transforming a very big challenge of making an accessible data-driven advocacy format of our program.
Thank you very much, Awoke. Those are really good points. I just want to move to Kathy now. You're heavily involved with civil society organizations and UN advocacy processes. We know how long, exhausting, tiring they are, and also quite underfunded. So my question is, how do you support your partners to identify the approaches that will work based on limited resources? So if they have limited resources, and this could be staff time, someone to prepare the report or collect the data. Do you have any advice for these partners?
And also, can you talk about how you've been able to maintain the momentum since you started with just 20 recommendations, now you're over 100 recommendations. How do you keep the momentum going? How do you sustain your partners in this work?
So momentum definitely is networks, the coalitions that we've created across all these 30 countries. And we've built capacity of civil society organizations, individuals who are interested in digital rights, who can research on digital rights, who can draft advocacy strategies on digital rights. And we've gone ahead and also connected the civil society actors to the policymakers. So for example, if one of the biggest challenges was to pass a law on data protection, so we would capacitate the civil society to be able to collect data that would inform that advocacy, to pass the law. And now we're working with members of parliament, both national and regional. You might have seen some members of parliament in this forum. Those are our partners under APRO, and they have actually gone ahead to implement some of the recommendations that have come out of the UPR in Geneva. One of the biggest challenges was that we were isolated from the policymakers. And they keep saying, civil society, you're always championing change, but you neglect the people who actually are supposed to cause the change by legal reform. So we might want a law to be passed, but if we don't have the parliamentarians in the room to be part of that discussion, then we're speaking to ourselves. So what we're doing right now is we've brought them into the room, and I can share some testimonies. Right now, Cameroon is in the process of drafting a digital rights bill because of this advocacy, and we have the Cameroonian MP who is also part of this forum. We recently passed a data protection law in Malawi in February of this year, and that was due to advocacy because we had engaged MPs in Malawi, the ICT and media committees, and right now, they're also in the process of reviewing their access to information law because of this advocacy. Benin is being proactive, and the parliament has invited us to capacitate members of parliament on digital rights, and next month they're going to start the process of reviewing their digital rights code, which has been restrictive to media freedoms in Benin. So it's about building coalitions, partnerships, and also the challenge of some stakeholders being combative. So for example, in Rwanda, when we presented our data to the government about digital rights restrictions, they're like, no, you didn't consult us. Who said journalists are being beaten? Who said this? So it was quite very tense, but eventually we built trust with the government regulators. And then we organized a workshop, invited the UN to be a part of it, and surprisingly, the regulator was in that workshop to open it. So we had already built that trust, and right now we're working with our local partners and the regulators to advance digital rights and media freedoms in Rwanda.
Wow, thank you so much for that. I think it's quite a success when we hear, countries are now adopting bills and policies. I mean, because it's not the easiest agenda to push, especially within the continent around digital rights. And you've talked about trust, and I want us to stay on that trust, and I'll move to Mercy so we can talk about trust. How do you and how did you sustain trust within your work, looking at the hundreds of moderators that you have to work with, all in different countries, different languages, different cultural barriers, legal systems, and all the nuances within it? So how do you sustain this trust from the data collection to litigation, and ensuring that throughout this, that you maintain the focus on the narratives of the people that you're serving, as well as the outcome that you hope to get? Thank you.
All right. I think I'll start a step further back, which is to define what community in litigation really means. I think from an advocacy perspective, it's easy to see community as the traditional sense of community. These are these people, I'm going to approach them for this specific thing. But I think the way litigation just begins, even organically, is that your duty of care is first and foremost to the person before you, the person who's had the courage to approach you or who you've been connected with by whatever way. That is the person you owe the first duty of care. And then your community becomes those who voluntarily will to be attached to that person. So it's not really getting the buy-in of an entire group so that you can take that case to court. It's more agreeing to take that one person's case and then leaving it very open to any person who might be willing to join that case with similar facts or something a little bit different where you could expand the scope of the case. So where the trust becomes very important here is, number one, to treat people like adults. I've seen many models with regards to litigation, including belittling of people's experiences, where you tell them, if you want most money, this is what you need to do, sign up here, do this, do that. In my experience, I think just being humanly honest with them, and that's very practical, where you're just honest as a human being. You're not being honest as a lawyer, you're just telling them, practically speaking, this is what we could do. It will involve exposing your name, this is what will happen. In the case of moderators, for example, the immediate opposition became the government telling the moderators to withdraw the case because they're chasing away Meta and other, American investors from the country. So it's to walk through these difficult steps with them very honestly and treating them as adults and giving them the option to make that decision. We have been in situations with the moderators where they've lacked food, they've lacked, just basic commodities, and then on the other side, Meta and Sama are offering them like peanuts and telling them, if you withdraw from the case, we'll give you so much money so you can go home. And when they've approached me with that, it hasn't been about, sort of downgrading them. It's like, I understand the predicament you're in, but this is the choice you have. You could sign away your right to, defend your mental health for, 100,000 shillings, or you could pursue this case no matter how difficult it is, helping them to even reason out through their practical challenges. People are people at the end of the day, and if I'm telling you the challenge I have is that if I tell this story publicly, I won't have a home to go to at the end of the day because I'll be chased from home. You can't be this lawyer with formalistic boundaries where you say, oh, I'm gonna care about the law only, figure out the rest of your stuff. And I know this is an experience a lot of people relate to when it comes to advocating for the queer community, for example. It's like, I'll come forward, but then I don't know where to go after that. I think as a lawyer, you have a responsibility there to try and see, okay, let's find you alternative, accommodation so that you're able to go on with this case, because you being safe is very much so part of the case. So looking at them as human and helping them through their immediate difficulties has been very instrumental in them not trusting me, but trusting the process. Because one of the things about litigation is that it's a very slow and painful process. So if they are not comfortable, if they are not seeing what this is going towards, then it becomes 2 years is too long a time, and I quit the litigation process. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing and just re-emphasizing what Kathy had said earlier, that no life is more important than a story. So it's all about humanizing the people, the data, the stories that we have, and actually using it to transform policies. I'll open it up to the audience. I know there's a couple of questions, comments, and if you don't ask, I'll pick on you like a teacher. So.
First of all, amazing presentation. I'm from Kenya. My name is Zanet Tume Mohammed. I work at Mukuru Slums, an organization called Identity 254. So this question is mainly directed to you, since you're my fellow Kenyan. You'll understand this. I'm looking at a situation whereby you have these bloggers. A good example, Edgar Obari. You get? He decides to post things that really disrupt people's lives. And maybe these people don't come forward because we've seen he's gay shamed people, he's done so much to women, and he still continues. Like, he has a following on Telegram, he has all this, like, he posts on Instagram, he's like, go watch my stories and all this stuff. But you, as a lawyer, what can you do to help the people who cannot come forward to, like, bring up a case whereby maybe they're scared? Because I actually try to imagine what some of these individuals have gone through, considering some of the content is not so good. Yeah, so such situation, how can you help as a lawyer?
I like that because you then bring the point of this is data or tea, like people like to call it, that's fed through digital platforms that then causes harm, right? So I think we'll take another one and then they'll answer. Yes?
Thank you, and thank you, the panelists. I think you've been so exhaustive. You've given us everything. What I want, I think it's related, but for me, it's not about taking cause of action. It's about how do we then guard the community, because we encourage the community to, my name is Flavia Zarango, and I work with Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum from Uganda, and we work with the LGBT community. So we've seen scenarios where communities trust, like bloggers, but usually for the LGBT community, they trust the international reporters because maybe they think the information will not get back home. And then they end up emptying themselves, like getting an opportunity to tell a story, and then they tell everything out. And at the end of the day, that information comes back to haunt them. So what is the experience? How do we guide the community to be able to sieve what, as much as you want the information, to sieve what you give out and what you don't? And because sometimes when that happens, the damage is done and the reporters have already moved on. So they leave all the burden to you to be able to handle what they've already spoiled. So how do we guide the community to gauge the amount of information to give and what not to give in such circumstances? And also, still, sometimes that is the information that people need, but at some point then it exposes them, yet it's needed, but then it is dangerous. So how do you create that balance?
Thank you. Whose data is collected and who gets to benefit from it? I think we can ask Eric maybe to take that question. Any other question? You have? Okay.
I can start. It's not an unfounded fear. The fear of that this is not even going to go anywhere. It's not an unfounded fear because I remember my first case where I really believed in the violation of the right to privacy that had happened in the blogger's expose, just being trivialized by a judge saying this is a domestic issue, they can just settle it out of court. So that fear is founded, and people see these things and fear to come forward. My answer is in two parts. We have a lot of work to do to educate people on their rights. And it's not as easy as me telling you, you know this, you have a right to this, you could go to court and access justice in this way. It's more, it's deeper than that. It's really constantly training people on the limits of, for example, the right to freedom of expression and this and that. And to be persistent in that over time, you start to see just one element coming forward and getting the confidence to challenge it. But then now to tie it to, for example, what she's raised, this is where you start to see the lawyer as bigger than this small cog in the equation that's just, their job is just to draft cases and take to court. you start to visualize a lawyer as a caregiver who has a strategy around, number one, if we go to court and this ends up with more people attacking this person who's already vulnerable, their personal information was already shared, going to court is now making people share that information even more. What's the strategy around that? Are we engaging, for example, with the platform on how to filter out this content if it's abusive? Are we coming up with a resiliency program where the petitioner is also undergoing therapy at the same time so that their health is protected first and foremost? Are we also engaging, a communication strategy where we are in charge of the narrative that's going out to where it's not just Edgar Barry and the others who are leading the narrative? Because when they go out there, they'll be like, this is an attack on freedom of expression, but you do have a legitimate interest here that's being protected, which is the protection of the vulnerable person, but also the right to privacy. So can you have a communication strategy that also leads with that, where a case has been filed to challenge that freedom of expression doesn't extend to violating people's privacy, something like that. So you can't just be this legalistic person who, let's go to court, I'll get you money. It's more about, okay, these things are going to happen. Do I have a plan around them? Do I have partners? Am I speaking to Katiba? Am I speaking to KHRC to come in and protect my person when they're under attack online? So that also helps with the resiliency of the individual who's going to court and helps them in the long run to stay in the case. Yeah.
Thank you. Kathy, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think to that question, we just need to sort of ask the question, what are the limitations to speech? The courts will tell you freedom of expression includes words which will shock, disturb, and annoy you. So what someone says might be annoying, it might be shocking, it might actually be disturbing. And we had a similar question with the MPs, one of the bloggers in Ghana called the vice president, who is a Muslim, a pig. And they went to court, and the court said, that is freedom of expression. And now there are memes all over with a vice president's face and a body of a pig, and it's, all over social media. And the courts are like, that is part of freedom of expression. So when we talk about harm, what are the legal limitations? Article 20 of the ICCPR, harm would be hate speech. Those are the exceptions to speech, freedom of expression. It would be propaganda to war. So, and that's why you'll find now a lot of courts are decriminalizing some of these offenses, defamation, sedition. So it's a thin line really, but when you go to progressive courts, especially now if the insult is to public officers, the legal standard is, they must have a thick skin and tolerate criticism much higher than the ordinary person. So it's a very, otherwise we're going to sue all the bloggers for annoying, because what you'll find annoying, I might find funny or interesting. So it's really a thin balance.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think bringing in the challenges within the legal frameworks. Eric, can you speak more to, the data that's collected, the trust, and, how it ends up causing more harm than good?
Thank you so much. And I want to relate this to the question from Flavia. I am a journalist by profession. When we are studying journalism, they tell us the principles of journalism: objectivity, fairness, trustworthiness, timeliness, and all that. In fact, they emphasize two important aspects. One, do not get attached to the story or the subject of the story as a journalist. And also, basically what that means is don't care. So to the community, if ever this message reaches to the community, because for me I've seen it firsthand in our country, where they passed the anti-LGBTQ law and all of a sudden International media is flocking around the LGBT community. We need that story, we need that story, we need that story. And they're very, very not empathetic because the story they want is a story of sadness, is a story of who's suffering. Because that's what makes news. So they don't care about you, to be honest. Because international media will come because the portrayal of what they want to portray is their narrative. It's not your narrative. Even when you try to tell your story, they'll pick what is going to make the headlines at the end of the day. If you have ever given an interview to a journalist, you know what I'm talking about. Whether local or international, I'll tell you they'll always pick what's going to make news for them. Good news never makes news for them. They want the bad news. So if you're giving data, if you're providing your information to a journalist, be very skeptical. You need to be very wise as an individual before even anyone comes to protect you. Because at the end of the day, when you consent and you give them their story, they'll publicize you. And even when you get the issues, who's going to suffer? It's going to be you as an individual. That story is going to go online or wherever it's going to go to, and it's going to land into bad soup. ABC, SABC, MC, whatever it is, they won't come to your rescue. I always tell this to my LGBTQ community fellows, that they will not come to your rescue. They are going to be with you, smile with you where they're taking that interview. The moment you're in hot soup, you can never call them. They don't even remember your name. You have to remind them of the story at the end of the day. So humanity sometimes lacks when people are collecting data because they lack the accountability of what will come after. Yeah? So from right at school, if you're being taught that you're not supposed to get attached to the person who's going to tell you their story, you're like, yes, I'll listen to you. Oh, sorry. Okay. But then we are the editor and the producer, like, what do you think will make sense? This is the part that will make sense most. Which photo will make sense most? They want your face. Even when you feel like they wouldn't, they'll tell you, no, the story will be better if your face is out there. They'll always convince you to go with their narrative. So I think as human rights activists, we have an opportunity to tell our community members when they're giving out their information, they also have to be very, very careful who they're giving their information to, what is the importance of this story. If you're not ready for the repercussions of what's going to come out of providing that story, kindly leave away. Because it's going to psychologically torture you, but it can also actually endanger you. The government might come after you, people around you might come after you. So depending on where you're giving that story, you have also to be very steady and very, very sober while you're giving that story. So I think it also comes to the responsibility of the individual. But lastly, organizations that are providing support, they also need to speak to people who are coming to collect this data. Because accountability lacks from them. You collect data from an individual, but you are not able to articulate well, where is this data going to end up, into which hands, at what point, and what are the possible risks if we are collecting this data from you, and we are going to tell this story in this such and such manner, what could come after that. So it's important to always communicate that, but also talk to people and put people into accountable spaces so they can be able to understand that they cause harm and they shouldn't.
Thank you, Eric. And I'll just add a bit from a previous session by Broen about being data critical. I think it's something we need to work with the communities that we serve to be critical of where is my data going, where is it going to be stored, who's going to use it. And just to highlight this for those who weren't in the session, about Data for Change's strategy on data empowerment is moving from data literacy to being data curious, being data critical, and being data confident. And speaking of that, like just sticking to that, I'll get back to all of you for your final message. And I'd like to start with Awoke, especially speaking to the data curiosity. When you work with visually impaired individuals who cannot use spreadsheets, cannot use the tools, the resources, but you still manage to engage with them in a data collection and advocacy process. So can you speak more towards an inclusive approach to working with communities, data, and of course the digital space? And then we'll move on with your call to actions.
Okay, thank you once again. Definitely that's one of the major focus that working towards being critical of the data, being curious of the data that you are collecting, and being very clear about the purpose that the data will be serving, and explaining this towards for the persons with visual impairment is the key strategy that we have been employing while we were doing the Hear the Blind Spot initiative. So the first thing that keeps the momentum and trust between the persons with visual impairment and our organization was like, we keep our promises that the data they will be giving us will be used for a bigger picture of a data-driven advocacy initiative. And at the same time, we told them that that would happen, and when it's happened, we will be like letting them know how it works. So we keep the promises, and we demonstrate that the information they already offered us was helpful in devising a strategy for an inclusive data-driven advocacy program. And at the same time, we also try to keep and maintain working with grassroots leaders. And when we say inclusive, we didn't focus only with visually impaired individuals, but we need to focus on the next generation of students at the primary level school system. So we were like empowering persons with visual impairment, and at the same time we were creating an awareness and letting children know how it feels for a person being a visually impaired. So whenever they're grown up, they are the future designers, they are the future political activists, they are the future policy experts. So we're trying to make the inclusive program towards like merging persons with visual impairment together with the sighted ones, so that our data-driven advocacy program works towards like understanding the feelings, understanding the challenges, understanding the social exclusion that persons with visual impairment are experiencing. So this helped us a lot in maintaining the momentum, and at the same time making our inclusive practices more becoming like prudent in including those children who are tomorrow's policymakers and designers.
One final message?
So one final message that I had is inclusion must not be a choice, it has to be a must, because we believe that all the inclusive practices or the inclusion during data collection and providing the data-driven advocacy program must be helpful towards achieving inclusion. So it must not be a choice for me. So it has to be a must, and we need to practice it every time. We need to be critical while we are collecting the data, while we are producing the end product of our initiatives.
So for me, my final message is co-creation is very important, especially for localization of, the data collection. And sometimes we do come from a place of power, maybe because of the resources, but they are the experts, the communities that we work with are the experts. So we need to include them in the design of this collection of data. We need to acknowledge them in the final product, so that comes back to communication, clear communication before, during, and after that process, and partnerships. So this whole process of APRO has been co-creation, localization, partnerships, and that's why UN representatives in Geneva are able to say that our fact sheets that have been created in partnership with Data for Change some of the most succinct and precise documents that they've seen in advocacy. And that's why we're seeing many of these recommendations coming forward that we put across. So partnerships, very important. Bring on board as many actors as possible, but read the room, you know, who is important for your advocacy plan at that moment.
Well, thank you so much for staying with us up to this time. But most importantly, for me, I would say that your story, your data is your power, and how you choose to tell it should be your decision. How you choose for people to know about it and when to know about it should be a decision that you still have power over. And if you are in a space where you feel like you're telling a story for someone else to tell the narrative of that story, I think you need to reconsider telling your story. Otherwise, it's our duty to fight for our freedom. It's our duty to win. It's our duty to love and fight for each other, because we have nothing to lose but our chains. Thank you.
I'd like to part with this. Cases are won at data collection stage. And that exercise in itself is both a qualitative exercise and a quantitative exercise. It's to know how many people have been affected by something, but to also document each and every one of their experiences, because sadly in litigation, one person's experience is not equals to you've proven it for everybody else. So my encouragement to organizations that are taking up litigation is to really budget around research and data collection, and not just the monetary budget allocation for it, but the time, the resources, the care around the workers, and care around the clients that you're collecting data from as well. I have found, sadly, that when we pick up key issues just from the publicity of it and take that to court, we do gain publicity around these cases being challenged, but we lose the very important thing, which is the justice, whether it's monetary justice, a policy decision being overturned, or the actual impact is lost because we didn't invest enough in the process of data collection. Thank you.
Wow, what a panel, right? Can you give them a round of applause, please? Thank you all so much for your participation today and for the discussions that we've had. It's clear from our panelists that community-led data is not only a tool for democracy and participation, but it's also a bridge between lived experiences and justice and systemic change. We've talked about the power of data that comes from the communities themselves, and the power of communities owning their narratives, their stories, and how this data can be turned into action that shakes up systems. I think what actually resonated with me the most, which we started with, is it's not just about the numbers. There are people behind all the data and everything that we're talking about today and throughout this past 2 days. We've talked about the challenges. We've acknowledged that indeed there are challenges and we don't have all the answers to all the questions, but through it all, we will consider the ethics around it, how to balance data collection with the responsibility of minimizing or avoiding harm and protecting vulnerable communities. As we wrap up, I'd leave you with 2 thoughts. The first is that collaboration is key, and we've seen that today. When communities come together with civil society, lawyers, data, technologists, when we come together with a shared vision of justice and democracy, then we can make it happen. And the second is that the journey is still ongoing. Today is one of many conversations that we will continue to have. And so as you live here, whether it's in your work or communities or in other advocacy spaces, I hope that you remember to take these insights and build on them. A huge thank you to Awoke, Kathy, Eric, and Marcy. Thank you to Data for Change for hosting this important event, and for all of you for being here on a Friday afternoon listening to us. Thank you for all your time, your energy, and your engagement. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
want me to? Yeah? So you want me to? Jump on.
Parce que réew mi fu mu toll parce que je pense que c'est very important ci ñun parce que jëlal 2 da ngay jël 2 non 1 0,5 la nekk jëlal 1